The galaxy was finally quiet after so many years of fighting. Star systems that once burned with fire from fleets and armies now showed signs of healing. Broken worlds were slowly repairing their cities, and people whispered the word peace, as if it was a fragile treasure they were afraid to lose. For the first time in decades, there was hope. The war between the Human Confederation and the mighty Zayari Empire had ended only weeks ago. The humans had fought with courage, surprising everyone with their persistence and clever strategies. Against all odds, they had stood against the empire that had ruled half the galaxy for centuries. The final victory was credited to one man, a human commander who had outsmarted fleets and turned defeats into triumphs. His name was spoken across worlds, General Daniel Hayes. On the neutral world of Luraven, a great ceremony was being prepared. The massive glass city was filled with banners of both sides. Music played in the streets and ambassadors arrived in grand ships. Today was the day the peace treaty would be signed. Today was the day old enemies would face one another not on the battlefield, but in the Hall of Unity. Among the guests was Princess Serenia of Zayar, daughter of the Empress and symbol of her people's pride. She was tall and graceful, her silver hair shining under the lights of the hall. Her golden eyes reflected both strength and sorrow. Serenia had grown up hearing stories of glory and power, but the war had shown her the cost of such pride. Too many soldiers had fallen, too many families had wept. She carried that weight with her as she walked into the grand chamber where the treaty would be signed. The hall was filled with leaders, officers, and envoys. Human generals stood in polished uniforms, while Zayari nobles wore their elegant robes. The atmosphere was tense. Though the fighting had ended, suspicion still lingered like smoke after fire. Everyone was watching, waiting for a wrong word or a sharp gesture to break the fragile peace. Then, he entered. General Daniel Hayes stepped into the chamber. He did not wear heavy metals or carry himself with arrogance. Instead, he moved with quiet confidence. His uniform was simple, but his presence was powerful. Whispers spread across the room as he walked forward. The man who had defeated the Zayari fleets. The man who had ended the war. Serenia felt her chest tighten. She had seen him before, on screens, in reports, in speeches. She knew his face from the images spread across the empire. But standing in the same room, seeing him with her own eyes, was different. His face carried both strength and scars of hardship. And yet, there was something more, something familiar. She stared at him as he bowed his head politely toward her mother, the Empress, who sat in her throne-like chair. Serenia's golden eyes widened as memories stirred in her heart. That face, those eyes. She had seen them long ago, not on a battlefield, but under a bright sky when she was only a child. For a moment, she almost forgot where she was. The noise of the hall faded. The voices of diplomats became distant. All she saw was him, the human who had won the war, the hero of his people. And deep inside, she felt a spark of recognition. Could it be? Serenia's hands trembled slightly, hidden by the long sleeves of her gown. She remembered a time when her family had visited a small frontier world many years ago. She had been young then, curious and eager to explore beyond the walls of the palace. On that world she had met a boy, a human boy. His name, what was his name? She whispered it in her heart. Daniel. The boy had been kind, full of laughter. He had not cared that she was a princess. He had shown her secret paths in the forest, told her stories of Earth and listened to her dreams. They had promised to see each other again, even though their worlds were so different. But then, the visit had ended. War soon followed, and Serenia had lost that memory in the flood of pain and duty. Now, standing in the Hall of Unity, she was almost certain. The boy she once knew had grown into the man who stood before her. The man who had led fleets, the man her people had called their enemy, was the same Daniel who had once held her hand as they ran through the fields of that forgotten world. The ceremony began. The Empress of Zayar and the leaders of the Human Confederation spoke words of peace. They praised the courage of soldiers and the strength of survivors. The treaty was placed on the shining table in the center of the chamber. But Serenya's thoughts were far away. She could not stop watching him. Daniel Hayes remained calm, his expression firm but respectful. Yet, at one moment his eyes moved across the hall. They met hers. It was only for a second, but Serenya felt her breath catch. His gaze sharpened, as if he too had seen something familiar. He blinked, and his expression softened for the briefest instant. Then, duty returned to his face and he turned away. Serenya's heart pounded. She could no longer deny it. This was not only the human general. This was her childhood friend. This was the boy who had promised they would meet again. But how could she speak of it now in front of so many leaders? How could she step forward and say the truth when the galaxy was still wounded from the war? Questions filled her mind, and uncertainty gripped her. Yet beneath it all there was hope, a small light she thought she had lost. Perhaps fate had brought them together again, not as enemies, but as something far greater. The hall erupted in applause as the treaty was finally signed. The galaxy celebrated peace. But for Princess Serenya, the real story was only beginning. She had found her childhood friend again, though he now carried the weight of an entire war on his shoulders. Would he remember her? Would he see her not as a princess of his former enemy, but as the girl who once called him a friend? Serenya's golden eyes lingered on him as he left the stage. She knew she had to find out. The ceremony was over, but Serenya's thoughts were not at peace. As the crowds left the great hall of unity, she remained quiet beside her mother, the Empress. Diplomats spoke, nobles bowed, and soldiers stood tall. But Serenya's golden eyes kept drifting back to the tall human general, Daniel Hayes. The name echoed in her heart like a forgotten song. She could not stop thinking about it. The more she looked at him, the more certain she became. He was not only a commander of war, he was someone she had once known, someone who had mattered to her long before battles and politics had drawn them apart. That night, in her guest chamber high above the shining city of Luravan, Serenya stood by the window. The stars glimmered like tiny lanterns, and the glass towers of the city reflected their glow. She closed her eyes and let the memories flow back to her, the forgotten world. She had been very young when her family traveled to the frontier. Her mother, the Empress, wished to strengthen ties with the outer colonies to remind them that the Zayari Empire was still strong. They had stayed for a few months on a small, peaceful world called Chiron. Unlike the grand cities of the core worlds, Chiron was quiet, filled with green fields, forests, and small villages. Serenya had often felt lonely in her palace life. Surrounded by guards, tutors, and formalities, she rarely had the chance to be a child. But on Chiron, she had been allowed more freedom. She remembered slipping away from her guards to explore a nearby forest. That was when she met him. The boy named Daniel. He was just a boy, perhaps a year older than her. His hair was messy, his clothes simple, but his eyes were full of life. He had been climbing a tree when she first saw him. She remembered how he laughed when she tried to climb too and slipped on the bark. Instead of mocking her, he had reached down, offering his hand. "Here," he had said with a bright grin. "I'll help you." That simple kindness had surprised her. Most children in the palace treated her differently once they learned she was a princess. They bowed too much, spoke too carefully, or avoided her altogether. But Daniel did not seem to care. To him, she was just another child who wanted to explore. From that day on, they met often in the forest. They raced through the trees, built small forts from branches, and shared stories. Serenya told him about the stars she had seen, from the imperial palace, about the songs her people sang during festivals. Daniel told her about Earth, the homeworld of humans, about oceans so wide you could not see the other side, about forests older than empires. They were only children, yet they dreamed big dreams. The promise one evening they sat on a hilltop, watching the twin moons rise above Chiron. The air was warm, filled with the gentle hum of night insects. Serenia remembered looking at him, her golden eyes full of wonder. "Do you think we'll see each other again?" she had asked. Daniel had picked up a small stone and turned it in his hands. His face was thoughtful. "Maybe the stars will let us," he had said. "Even if our worlds are far apart, maybe one day we'll meet again." She had smiled. "Then, it's a promise." "A promise," he agreed, pressing the stone into her hand. "Keep this, so you won't forget." She had kept that stone for years, hidden in her belongings even as the Empire moved from one crisis to another. But when war came, when fear replaced hope, she had lost it. Or perhaps, she thought, it had been taken away by fate, just as Daniel had been taken away from her life. The pain of war. The memories turned bitter as Serenia recalled what followed. The peace of Chiron did not last. Tensions between humans and Zayari grew. When war finally erupted, all ties between their peoples were broken. Serenia's family withdrew from the frontier, and she never saw Daniel again. At first, she tried to believe that the war was far from him, that he was safe somewhere on Earth or another human world. But as years passed, she heard whispers of battles, of heroes rising, of a human commander named Hayes who fought with brilliance. It had not occurred to her then that he could be the same boy. The name was common, and the galaxy was wide. She had forced herself to believe that her childhood friend had simply grown into a normal man, untouched by the hatred that consumed their worlds. Now she knew the truth. The present. Once more. Serenia opened her eyes and looked again at the city lights. Daniel Hayes, the boy who had given her a stone and a promise, had become the general who defeated her people. Her chest ached with confusion. How could the kind boy she had known lead fleets against her empire? How could the laughter they once shared exist in the same man who now carried the weight of thousands of soldiers' deaths? Yet when their eyes had met in the hall earlier that day, she had seen something more. For just a moment beneath the calm mask of the general, she thought she saw the same boy from Chiron, the boy who had reached down to help her climb, the boy who had promised to meet her again. She touched the window with her fingertips, whispering softly to herself, "Daniel, do you remember me too?" Daniel's thoughts. At the same time, in another wing of the city, General Daniel Hayes sat in silence. His officers congratulated him, diplomats praised him, but his mind was far away. He could not forget the golden-eyed princess who had stared at him during the ceremony. There was something about her gaze that pulled at old memories. Memories of laughter, of promises, of a silver-haired girl who had never cared about titles. A girl who had once been his friend. Daniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. Could it truly be her, the princess of Zaire? The same Serenia he had met on Chiron as a child? The idea seemed impossible, yet his heart told him it was true. He remembered her laughter. He remembered the way she had looked at the stars. And he remembered the promise they had made. For years he had buried that memory, believing it was lost to time. Now, standing on the edge of peace after so much war, he found himself face to face with the same girl. Now a princess, now his former enemy. Two paths, one memory. Both Serenia and Daniel lay awake that night, staring at the stars from different chambers of the same city. Neither could forget the past. Neither could ignore the strange twist of fate that had brought them together again. The war was over, but their story was only beginning. Would the memory of childhood be strong enough to heal the wounds of war? Or would duty and pride tear them apart once more? Only time would tell. But in their hearts the promise of Chiron still lingered, and somewhere beyond the stars, destiny waited. The days after the signing ceremony were filled with endless meetings. Delegates argued about trade routes, ambassadors discussed prisoner exchanges, and military officers debated the removal of fleets from border systems. The galaxy might have stopped fighting, but trust was still fragile. Every word spoken seemed to carry the weight of history. Princess Serenia sat beside her mother during most of these discussions, her golden eyes calm but watchful. She listened as humans and Zayari spoke across the table, their voices careful, sometimes sharp. Peace was fragile, like a glass cup, strong if held with care, but able to shatter with one wrong move. Yet Serenya's thoughts were not always on the politics before her. They often drifted to Daniel Hayes, the human general who sat across the chamber, his uniform simple but his presence commanding. Every time he spoke, his words were firm yet measured. He did not boast, nor did he show anger. He spoke as a man who carried both victory and burden, and every time his eyes flickered toward her, even for a moment, she felt the same pull she had felt in the great hall. It was as if the years between them had vanished, leaving only the memory of two children who once dreamed under twin moons. The first meeting in private. One evening, after another long day of tense debates, Serenya walked alone through the garden of the ambassador's palace. Lanterns floated above the pathways, glowing softly, and the air was filled with the scent of alien flowers. She needed space to breathe, to escape the endless formalities, but she was not alone. Ahead, standing near a fountain of crystal water, was Daniel Hayes. His back was turned, but Serenya recognized him at once. For a moment, she considered turning away. After all, what would people say if the Princess of Zaire was seen speaking with the human general in private? Yet her heart urged her forward. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither spoke. The garden was quiet, save for the gentle sound of water and the whisper of leaves. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. His voice was calm yet soft. "It has been a long time, hasn't it?" Serenya froze. He remembered. You know who I am," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel gave a small nod. "I didn't realize it at first, not during the war, not even when I first saw you in the hall. But when I looked into your eyes..." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "I remembered Chiron. I remembered a silver-haired girl who laughed even when she fell from trees." Serenya's heart ached with both joy and sorrow. "And I remembered a boy who reached down to help me climb." For a while, they simply stood there, letting the memories bridge the silence between them. It was as if the years of war had melted away, leaving only the bond of childhood, the weight of the present, but reality soon returned. Serenya lowered her gaze, her golden eyes clouded. "So much has changed since then," she murmured. "We are no longer children. You are the hero of humanity, and I..." She hesitated. "I am the daughter of the empire you defeated." Daniel's face grew serious. "I never wanted the war," he said quietly. "But once it began, I had no choice but to fight. Too many lives depended on it." "I know," Serenya whispered. "I never wanted it either. And yet here we are." The words hung heavy in the air. They both knew that the bond they once shared was now tangled in the shadows of war. Yet even as sorrow filled them, there was also comfort. Comfort in knowing that despite everything, the connection had survived. Shared memories. They began to talk, softly at first, then with growing warmth. Serenya spoke of the days on Chiron, of how those memories had carried her through the loneliness of palace life. Daniel spoke of how he had kept that promise in his heart, even when the galaxy seemed to push them further apart. "I thought I would never see you again," Serenya admitted. "So did I," Daniel replied. "But maybe fate had other plans." They both laughed gently at that, though the laughter carried sadness as well. Still, in that quiet garden, for the first time in years, they were not a princess and a general, not enemies of war, but simply Serenya and Daniel, the children who had once dreamed of peace. The eyes of others, their private meeting did not go unnoticed. Hidden in the shadows, eyes watched them. A Zayari noble, loyal to the Empress, frowned at the sight of Serenya speaking so closely with the human general. On another side of the garden, a human officer who distrusted the Zayari clenched his fists. Whispers soon spread through both camps. Some said the princess was too close to the human commander. Others feared the general might be swayed by alien influence. Though Serenya and Daniel did nothing dishonorable, suspicion was a flame easily lit in the fragile days of peace. The next morning, Serenia heard the whispers in the palace corridors. She kept her face calm, but inside her heart was troubled. Could their bond, once so innocent, now bring danger to the fragile treaty? A difficult choice. Later that day, Serenia stood before her mother, the Empress. The older woman was wise and strong, her silver crown gleaming. "You have been seen speaking with the human general," the Empress said, her voice calm but sharp. "Yes, mother," Serenia answered honestly. "Do you forget what he is? He may be a man of honor, but he is still the one who defeated our fleets. The nobles whisper already. They fear you are being careless." Serenia's heart pounded, but she raised her chin. "He is not only the general. He is also someone I knew before the war. He is Daniel, my friend." The Empress studied her carefully. After a long silence, she said, "Friendship is a gift, but remember, Serenia, peace is fragile. Do not let personal feelings place it at risk." Serenia bowed her head. "I understand." But in her heart, she could not let go of Daniel. She could not pretend the bond was gone. Daniel's burden on his side, Daniel faced similar doubts. Some of his officers questioned him, asking why he spoke with the alien princess. "She is the daughter of the enemy," one officer warned. "Can you trust her?" Daniel remained calm. "The war is over. If we do not learn to trust, then what was all the sacrifice for?" But deep inside, he knew it was more than duty. It was personal. Serenia was not only the daughter of the Empress, she was the friend who had once promised they would meet again. The promise recalled. That evening, Daniel found himself standing on the balcony of his quarters, staring at the stars. He remembered the promise they had made on Chiron so long ago. "Even if our worlds are far apart, maybe one day we'll meet again." They had met again. But could the promise survive the weight of the past? Could it survive the eyes of those who distrusted them? Daniel clenched his fists. He had faced fleets. He had faced war. But somehow, facing Serenia again after all these years felt even harder. The bond remained. Serenia, too, stood by her window that night, looking out into the galaxy. Despite the whispers, despite the warnings, she felt her heart steady. She had found Daniel again, and no war could erase that truth. Perhaps the galaxy was not yet ready to see them as friends. Perhaps suspicion would always follow them. But in her heart, Serenia knew one thing. The bond they shared had survived the fires of war. And as long as that bond remained, there was hope. Not just for them, but for peace itself. The galaxy slept under the light of 1,000 stars. 2. Hearts, once joined in childhood, now carried the weight of nations. Yet in the silence of the night, they were still Serenia and Daniel, and their hidden bond was only growing stronger. The treaty was signed, but peace was not yet strong. It was like a young tree, alive, full of promise, but easily broken if storms came too soon. Every day in the city of Luravan, humans and Zayari met to discuss the future, and every day the air felt heavy with mistrust. Princess Serenia could feel it in every meeting. The words sounded polite, but beneath them was anger, pride, and wounds that still bled. Some Zayari nobles muttered that their empire had bent too low. Some human officers whispered that the aliens could never be trusted. And in the center of it all stood Daniel Hayes. He spoke with calm strength, reminding both sides that the war was over, that peace must be given a chance. But even he could not silence all the doubts. Whispers in the shadows, rumors spread faster than light. People began to notice the small glances between Serenia and Daniel, the moments when their eyes met across the council table, the times they were seen walking in the same gardens. Some said the princess was too close to the human commander. Others said the commander was being softened by alien influence. One evening, Serenia walked down the long halls of the palace and overheard two nobles speaking in low voices. "She forgets who she is," one hissed. "The daughter of the Empress, speaking to the human who crushed our fleets. Does she not see the shame she brings?" "She is young," the other replied coldly. "But if she continues this way, she will weaken our hand." The humans will use her foolish heart to break us. Serenia passed without a word, but their voices burned in her chest. She wanted to shout at them, to tell them they were wrong. But she held her head high, knowing that if she showed anger it would only give them more fuel for their suspicions. The clash in the council. The next day, the council chamber was louder than ever. Human officers accused Zayari nobles of hiding weapons in secret bases. Zayari nobles accused humans of demanding too much control over trade. The voices rose higher and higher, the treaty trembling under the weight of anger. At last, one human officer slammed his hand on the table. "How can we trust you?" he shouted at the Zayari. "Your people killed millions, and now you expect us to believe you are ready for peace?" A Zayari noble stood sharply, his robes swaying. "And your fleets burned our colonies. Do not pretend your hands are clean, human." The room was moments away from chaos. Serenia's heart pounded as she looked around. Leaders were shouting, soldiers were glaring, and the hope of peace seemed ready to collapse. Then Daniel Hayes stood. His voice was not loud, but it carried across the chamber with authority. "Enough." The shouting stopped. All eyes turned to him. Daniel looked at both sides, his face steady. Yes, lives were lost. Yes, both sides carry scars that may never fade. But if we allow those scars to rule us, then what was the point? Of ending the war? Did we come here only to fight again with words instead of weapons? He paused, letting the silence grow heavy. Then he said, "Peace is not given. It is built, and it can only be built if both sides are willing to carry the burden together." The chamber was quiet. Some faces were still hard, but others lowered, their eyes in thought. Serenia felt her chest fill with pride. This was the Daniel she remembered, not only the boy from her childhood, but the man he had become. A leader who could calm storms with his words, Serenia's voice. But the silence was fragile. She knew it needed more than Daniel's words. Slowly, Serenia stood. Every eye turned to her, the daughter of the Empress. She spoke clearly, her voice calm but strong. "I was a child when I first met a human. He did not treat me as a princess nor as an enemy. He treated me as a friend. That memory stayed with me even when the war tore our worlds apart." Murmurs spread through the chamber, but she continued, "Today I still believe in that truth. We are different, yes. We carry pain, yes. But if two children can share laughter beneath the same stars, then surely two great peoples can learn to share peace." Her words hung in the air. Some nobles frowned, some humans looked uncertain, but many faces softened. Even the Empress, sitting tall in her throne-like seat, watched Serenia with thoughtful eyes. Tension behind closed doors. That night, however, the whispers returned. The same nobles who doubted her whispered that she had been too open, too emotional. Some said she had embarrassed the Empire. In the human camp, a few officers grumbled that Daniel was letting his friendship with the princess cloud his judgment. But despite the whispers, others began to see things differently. Younger diplomats spoke with more hope. A few officers admitted that maybe, just maybe, peace could hold. Serenia and Daniel both knew they had taken a risk by speaking so openly. Yet they also knew that if no one dared to risk, peace would crumble before it even began. A private conversation. Later, in the quiet of the gardens once again, Serenia and Daniel met. "You spoke well today," Daniel said softly. "You reminded them that peace is not only written on paper, it is lived in the heart." Serenia smiled faintly. "And you reminded them that scars cannot be allowed to rule us. I feared the council would collapse before our eyes." Daniel looked at her, his gaze warm but thoughtful. "We are walking on a thin path. Every step could break it." "Yes," Serenia agreed. She lowered her voice. "But if we walk it together, maybe we can reach the other side." For a moment, silence stretched between them. The lantern light reflected in her golden eyes, and Daniel felt the weight of the promise they had made as children. It had returned, not only as memory, but as a guiding star. The challenge ahead. The following days were no easier. New problems arose. Arguments about prisoners, about damaged colonies, about which fleets should be withdrawn first. Every meeting was a storm, yet each time tempers flared. Either Daniel or Serenia would speak, calming the room. Sometimes they spoke of duty, sometimes of justice, sometimes simply of hope. Slowly, carefully, they began to turn suspicion into trust. Not all at once, not fully, but step by step. Still, danger remained. Both of them knew that a single spark could undo everything. Enemies of peace lurked in shadows, waiting for a chance to strike. A growing light one night, Serenia returned to her chamber and looked out at the stars. She remembered Chiron, the hill where they had once watched the moons together. She remembered the stone Daniel had given her, the promise he had made, and she whispered to herself, "The promise still lives." Across the city, Daniel stood on his balcony, looking at the same stars. He too thought of that promise. And though he was weary, though the galaxy's burdens weighed heavily on his shoulders, he felt a strange calm, because he knew he was not carrying it alone. Peace had not yet been secured, challenges waited ahead, but in the hidden bond between a princess and a human general there was strength that might yet hold the galaxy together, and even as whispers of doubt spread, the quiet truth remained. Sometimes it was not fleets or armies that saved worlds. Sometimes it was the courage of two hearts that refused to let go of each other. The final day of the Peace Summit arrived. The city of Luravan glittered under the morning suns, its crystal towers shining like silver blades in the light. Banners of both the Human Confederation and the Zayari Empire fluttered side by side, their colors reflecting across the wide plazas. Crowds filled the streets waiting to hear the final words of peace. But inside the Great Hall of Unity, tension still lingered. The treaty had been signed, yes, but treaties could be broken. Trust was thin, like glass ready to crack. Old wounds whispered in the hearts of soldiers and nobles alike. One mistake could still turn this fragile peace into ashes. Princess Serenia sat quietly beside her mother, the Empress, her golden eyes steady. Across the chamber, General Daniel Hayes stood tall among human officers. Both knew this was the most important day of all. If peace survived today, it could survive the storms ahead. But if it failed, the galaxy might once again drown in war. The last obstacle. The meeting began with final discussions, trade agreements, prisoner exchanges, the return of colonies. For a while things went smoothly. Voices were calm, papers were signed, and hope filled the room. Then, suddenly, a Zayari noble rose to speak. His voice was sharp, his tone filled with pride. "I cannot accept this treaty," he declared. "The Empire has bent too far. We bow before those who once cowered at our fleets. It is shameful." Murmurs spread across the hall. Some nobles nodded in agreement. On the human side, officers tensed, their hands resting on their belts as if ready for trouble. Daniel Hayes stepped forward, his eyes calm, but his jaw tight. "The treaty is not about shame. It is about survival. Both sides have lost too much already. Do you wish to lose more?" The noble sneered. "Easy words for a man who stands as a victor. You speak of peace, but your fleets burned our colonies. How can we trust you?" The hall was heating like a forge. Serenia could feel the fragile peace slipping away. If the shouting grew louder, if anger took control, the summit would collapse. She took a breath and stood. Serenia's stand, her golden eyes swept across the hall, silencing some of the murmurs. Her voice was calm, yet it carried a weight that made even the proudest noble pause. "I have walked through the ruins of our cities," she said. "I have seen children without parents, and soldiers who will never walk again. I know the cost of war." She turned toward the human side of the chamber. "And I have seen the same pain in human eyes. We are not different in our grief." The hall grew quiet. Even the noble who had spoken earlier lowered his gaze, though his face was still hard. Serenia continued, her voice steady. "Yes, we carry scars, but scars remind us of what we must never repeat. If we let anger guide us, then all those lives lost will be for nothing. Peace is not weakness. Peace is the greatest strength. Her words filled the chamber, and when she finished, Daniel stepped forward beside her. Daniel's voice. He spoke with calm power, his voice strong but not harsh. I fought in the war. I led men and women who trusted me. Many of them did not return, and yet if I had the chance to see them again, I know what they would say. They would not want more fighting. They would want their sacrifice to mean something. They would want us to build a future better than the past. He looked around the chamber, his gaze firm. If we choose anger today, then the war has no true end. If we choose peace, then their voices will live on through us. The hall was silent. Even the most doubtful faces softened. Slowly, one by one, the nobles and officers lowered their heads. The fire of anger dimmed, replaced by a quiet, fragile respect. The last obstacle had passed. The celebration, later that evening. The plaza outside the hall filled with people. Lanterns floated into the sky, fireworks lit up the horizon, and music echoed through the streets. Humans and Zayari walked side by side, cautious but hopeful. For the first time in living memory, enemies shared laughter. On the balcony of the palace, Serenia and Daniel stood together, watching the lights above the city. The stars themselves seemed brighter, as if they too celebrated the new beginning. You spoke with great courage today, Daniel said softly. Serenia smiled faintly. And you reminded them why peace matters. Together we gave them hope. He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes thoughtful. Do you think it will last? Her golden eyes turned to the stars. Peace is like a flame, it must be protected or it will go out. But if enough hands guard it, it can light the whole galaxy. Daniel nodded. Then we must be its guardians. The private moment, the celebration. Below grew louder, but on the balcony, silence stretched between them. Serenia turned toward him, her heart beating fast. Daniel, she said softly. Do you remember the promise we made on Chiron? He smiled gently. I do. I promised that one day, no matter how far apart our worlds were, we would meet again. Her eyes glimmered. And here we are. Yes, he said, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. Here we are. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, no longer a princess and a general, no longer symbols of nations, but two friends who had found each other again after so many years. A new beginning. As the fireworks lit the sky, Serenia whispered, Perhaps the galaxy needed us to meet again, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. Daniel nodded. Perhaps fate knew that two children's promise could become the seed of peace. She smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Then let us keep that promise, not just for us, but for all who dream of a future without war. Together, they looked out at the city, at the stars, at the galaxy beyond. The war was over, the peace was fragile, but hope was alive. For Serenia and Daniel, it was not only the end of war, it was the beginning of something greater. A new chapter for their worlds, a new chapter for themselves, a new beginning.